The street festival downtown was packed, music thumping, food stalls sizzling, and crowds flooding every walkway. People laughed, danced, took selfies, and enjoyed the warm afternoon breeze. In the middle of this lively chaos walked a large man in a black hoodie, sunglasses, and boots. Calm, music silent, and moving with a confidence that made some people subtly step aside. That man was Steven Seagal. But no one recognized him dressed like this. Not even the two rookie cops patrolling the festival for suspicious behavior. Officer Lane tapped his partner and pointed. "See that guy? The big one with the hood? He's not following the crowd flow. Looks like trouble." Officer Briggs nodded. "Yeah, and look how he's scanning everything. Probably casing the place." What they called casing was actually just Steven doing what he always did. Observing, assessing, reading body language like a book. Years of discipline made it natural. He paused near a food stall, checking his phone briefly. That's when they moved in. "Hey, you!" Officer Lane barked loudly enough for people nearby to stop and look. "Step aside now." Steven glanced up slowly, confused. "Is there a problem, officers?" Briggs circled around him, sizing him up like he was a threat. "Yeah, there's a problem. You're ignoring our directions and walking wherever you want. Festival has flow zones." Steven kept his hands visible, calm, measured. "I wasn't aware. I can follow whatever path you need." But Lane scoffed. "Oh, now he's cooperating. Funny how that works once we show up." People in the crowd exchanged uncomfortable looks. A woman whispered, "Why are they pressing him? He's just standing there." Steven stayed composed. "Officers, I'm only here to enjoy the festival. There's no need for hostility." That made Briggs raise an eyebrow. "Hostility? Look, buddy, just show ID and don't make this complicated." Steven reached slowly toward his pocket. "No sudden moves." Lane snapped, hand already moving toward his taser. Steven froze, lifting his hand slightly. "I'm just getting my ID," but the tone was already set. They weren't listening. They weren't observing. They were assuming. A few phones came out recording. The crowd felt the tension forming like a storm cloud. They had no idea who they were dealing with. And in the next few minutes, these officers were about to make the biggest mistake of their careers. What happened next shocked everyone watching. The tension at the festival shifted like a sudden change in weather. A moment ago, people were laughing and eating fried noodles from paper trays. Now they were forming a loose circle around a man who stood calm as a stone. And two officers who seemed determined to turn calm into conflict. Officer Briggs stepped closer, his chest puffed out. I said, "Show your ID. Why are you taking so long?" Steven Seagal didn't move. His hands were still raised slightly to avoid any misunderstanding. His voice remained steady. "You yelled, 'No sudden moves.' I'm just following your instructions." His tone was polite, but firm enough that a few people nodded in approval. Officer Lane didn't like that. "You think you're funny?" Lane snapped. "You want to play smart? We deal with guys like you every day." Steven inhaled slowly. "I assure you, gentlemen, you've never dealt with someone like me." Briggs smirked. "Oh, yeah. And who are you supposed to be? Some wannabe action star?" A few teenagers in the crowd giggled nervously. Steven kept his expression unreadable. "I'm just here to enjoy the festival." But that answer wasn't good enough for these officers. Lane stepped forward until he was inches from Steven's face. "You're here to cause problems. That's what you're here for. Big guy like you always thinks he can do whatever he wants." Steven tilted his head slightly, studying the officer's posture, hands, music, breathing. He could see the adrenaline, the insecurity, the ego. He'd trained in reading people for 3 decades. "It wasn't hard, officers," Steven said. "There's no need to escalate this." "You asked for ID and I'm trying to give it to you." Lane scoffed loudly. "Trying, you're stalling." Probably hiding something. Briggs chimed in. "Yeah, empty your pockets slowly." Steven blinked. "You want me to reach into my pockets after you told me not to move?" The hypocrisy was so obvious that even some bystanders shook their heads. A young man recording whispered, "Man, these cops are looking for trouble," a woman added. "This is why people don't trust them anymore." The officers heard the murmurs, and their frustration only grew. Briggs barked, "Stop talking back and do what we say." Stephen kept his hands raised, voice calm. "I'm cooperating, but I won't be reckless." Lane's jaw tightened. "Is that a threat?" Stephen sighed softly. "No, it's common sense, but that was enough to push the officers over the edge." Lane grabbed Stephen's arm roughly while Briggs moved behind him. Stephen didn't resist. He didn't fight. He didn't even tense up. But everyone watching could see where this was heading. A man from the crowd called out, "Hey officers, he's not resisting. Chill out." Lane whipped his head around. "You want to get involved?" People pulled out more phones. Record buttons flashed everywhere. Dozens of eyes witnessed the confrontation turn into intimidation. Briggs pressed. "Put your hands behind your back." Stephen answered, "If I move too quickly, you'll say I reached for something." Lane's voice rose. "Stop talking and just do it." And still, Stephen did not lose his calm. He simply said, "I want to avoid misunderstandings. That's all." But misunderstandings were exactly what the officers were creating. Around them, the crowd buzzed with energy, a mix of anger, confusion, and uncomfortable curiosity. It was no longer just a police check. It was a spectacle. A teenager filming whispered, "Bro, these cops have no clue who they're messing with." But most people didn't know either. Not yet. Stephen slowly lowered one hand. Lane flinched back, shouting, "Hey, watch it." The sudden reaction made the crowd gasp. Stephen froze again. "May I reach for my ID now?" Lane didn't answer. He just glared, hand resting closer to his taser. Briggs circled again. "I don't like the way you're acting." "You're nervous." Stephen replied, "I'm controlled." "You're nervous." That one sentence made Lane snap. "Turn around. Hands behind your back," he yelled. Stephen exhaled slowly, music lowering his hands. Very well. But inside, he knew this wasn't going to end with simple handcuffs. These officers had already convinced themselves he was a threat no matter what he did. He turned slowly, calmly, but Lane grabbed him aggressively, twisting his arm. Briggs seized his shoulder, pushing him forward. People shouted, "He's not resisting." "Leave the guy alone, bro." "What are you doing?" The officers ignored all of it. Stephen's sunglasses slipped slightly as he bent forward from the shove. For a moment his eyes were visible, sharp, controlled, music trained. Briggs reached for Stephen's neck. The crowd gasped again. The situation was seconds away from something dangerous. And still, Stephen remained calm, repeating quietly, "Music, gentlemen, you really don't want to do this." They didn't believe him. But the world would soon find out exactly why he said those words. Have you ever seen officers abuse their power? Comment below. Also, tell us which country and city you're watching this story from. The air around the scene felt electric, charged with tension thick enough to taste. People stopped eating, stopped walking, stopped talking. Every eye in the festival was fixed on one moment. One mistake unfolding in slow motion, and in the middle of it all stood Steven Seagal. Still calm, Officer Briggs tightened his grip on Stephen's shoulder, fingers digging into the thick fabric of the hoodie. Lane positioned himself behind Stephen, breathing hard like someone preparing for a fight he wasn't trained for. "Hands behind your back." Lane barked again, but his voice cracked. Not with authority, but with frustration. Stephen turned slightly, speaking in that same steady, music-controlled tone. "Officer, if you allow me to explain, this doesn't need to escalate." Lane snapped. "Stop talking." Before Stephen could respond, Briggs shoved him forward. Stephen's foot caught the ground, but he didn't lose balance. He was too centered for that, years of martial arts grounding him like a mountain. Still, the cops thought he was resisting. Lane lunged forward, wrapping his arm around Stephen's neck. The crowd screamed, "Hey, what the hell? He's not music resisting." "Get your hands off him." Phones shot up everywhere, capturing every angle. The festival noise faded. The only sounds were Lane's grunts, Briggs shouting commands, and the rising panic of witnesses. But Stephen did not fight back. He didn't raise a hand. He didn't twist away. He didn't even tense his muscles. He simply stood there as Lane's forearm locked around his throat. Briggs yelled, "Music, take him down." "Take him down." Lane tried hard, but Steven Seagal wasn't moving. Lane's arm flexed, veins straining as he tried to drag Stephen backward, but to him, it felt like trying to choke out a statue unmoving, unshakable. Stephen's voice came out calm, almost too calm for a man in a chokehold. "Officer, I advise you to release me. You're making a very serious mistake," Lane snarled. "Oh, tough guy, huh?" "Resisting arrest." "He's not resisting," someone shouted. Lane ignored it, tightening the choke. Briggs grabbed Stephen's wrist, trying to wrench it behind his back. Stephen didn't budge. Instead, he simply lowered his chin slightly, relaxing his shoulders in a way only a trained fighter would recognize, protecting his neck without counterattacking. Briggs hissed. "Why isn't he going down?" Lane growled. "Put more pressure." The crowd gasped as Lane squeezed harder. Two women covered their mouths. A teenager cursed under his breath. An elderly man shook his head, muttering, "Those boys don't know who they're messing with." Stephen spoke again, voice still steady despite the chokehold. "I'm giving you one last warning, amigo. You're crossing a line you can't uncross." Lane spat. "Shut up." Briggs reached for his taser. That was when the entire crowd lost it. "No, don't tase him. He's not fighting you." "Stop, man, stop." Briggs hesitated, not because he realized he was wrong, but because the phones pointed at him suddenly felt like weapons aimed at his career. "Lane, maybe we should," Lane interrupted. "No, he's resisting. I'm taking him down." With that, Lane pushed all his weight forward, dragging Stephen into a forced knee drop. But Stephen simply bent slightly, absorbing the push with controlled precision. It was like trying to tip over a tree with a rope. Lane's eyes widened. "What the hell?" Stephen softly said, "Sir, I am not your enemy." Briggs stepped back, frustrated and embarrassed. "Dude, why won't he just go down?" Someone from the crowd yelled, "Because he's freaking Steven Seagal." Heads turned. The officers froze. Music Lane blinked, confused. "Steven who?" The teen shouted again, louder. "Steven Seagal." "Music, the guy you're choking, is literally Steven Seagal." People gasped. A few mouths dropped open. Someone squeaked a nervous laugh, but Lane didn't believe it. He tightened the choke. "You think a movie star scares me?" He sneered. Stephen exhaled slowly. "Officer, I am not just a movie star." Briggs scoffed. "What? You think you're some secret agent?" Stephen didn't answer. He didn't have to, because the truth was seconds from exploding. The tension in the air grew so sharp, it felt like it could cut skin. Lane pulled harder. The chokehold deepened. Stephen lowered his voice, almost whispering, "You're about to regret this." Silence. Then click. A badge slipped out from Stephen's hoodie pocket. It hit the ground with a metallic tap. A bystander picked it up, and the moment he read it, his face turned white. He held the badge up high, shouting, "Oh my God, he's the FBI director." The entire crowd screamed. Lane's arm loosened instantly. Briggs stumbled backward like he'd seen a ghost. Phones zoomed in. People shouted. Panic exploded. And Stephen calmly straightened his jacket. This wasn't just a mistake. This was career-ending. Music and the officers knew it. If you were standing there, would you step in or stay quiet? Tell us in the comments. For a moment, the world stopped. Every sound, the music, the chatter, even the wind seemed to freeze as the reality of what just happened settled over the festival crowd. The bystander holding the badge trembled, his voice shaking as he repeated, He's the FBI director." Lane's arm snapped open like it had been burned. He stumbled backward so fast he nearly fell. Briggs froze mid-movement, mouth hanging open, eyes bulging. Steven Seagal calmly reached out and took the badge back. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make a scene. That almost made it worse, because silence from a man holding that badge was far more terrifying than yelling. The officers looked like their souls had left their bodies. Lane whispered, Director of the FBI. No, that's not. This can't be. Briggs staggered forward, his voice breaking. Sir, this is a misunderstanding. Stephen slipped the badge into his hoodie pocket with slow, deliberate precision. His hands were steady, controlled, the kind of steady that comes from someone who's faced war zones. Not to overeager cops at a food festival. I gave you several chances to de-escalate, Stephen said softly. The softness made Lane's legs wobble. Briggs raised his hands. Sir, we didn't know. You could have. Stephen's eyes sharpened. It was the first true display of authority since the entire ordeal began. I informed you that you were making a serious mistake, Officer Briggs. Music, you ignored every warning. Lane swallowed hard, his face pale. I thought you were resisting. You wouldn't let me take you down. A man from the crowd yelled. He wasn't resisting at all. Others joined in. You guys assaulted him. You choked the freaking FBI director. He told you to stop. You're finished, bro. Lane's breathing turned fast and shallow. He looked around like a trapped animal. His hand hovered near his radio as if calling for backup would somehow fix what he'd done. Stephen shook his head once. Do not call anyone. Lane froze instantly. Stephen stepped closer. Not aggressive, not threatening, just close enough that both officers could see the controlled fury behind his calm expression. Do you understand what you've just done? He asked quietly. Briggs stammered. We thought you were grabbing those kids. You assumed. Stephen interrupted. Without assessing, without asking questions, without identifying yourselves properly, Lane's voice cracked. We did identify. Music, no, Stephen corrected. You barked orders. You escalated. And then you attacked a citizen who posed zero threat. Briggs rubbed the back of his neck. Sir, we had no idea it was you. Stephen's eyes narrowed. Your behavior would still be unacceptable even if I were a high school janitor. The crowd erupted into applause and whistles. Lane looked like he wanted to evaporate on the spot. Sweat dripped from his forehead. His mouth kept opening and closing with no sound coming out. Stephen continued, You didn't use training? You used adrenaline, Briggs whispered. Music, sir. Please, we're begging you. Don't let this ruin our careers. We were just trying to protect. Stephen stepped right in front of them. Suddenly, the weight of who he was, what he represented, hit them harder than any punch could. Your careers, Stephen said quietly, are the least of my concerns. Lane's breath hitched. You endangered civilians with your impulsiveness. You assaulted a federal director, and you're lucky you didn't injure those children you were supposedly protecting. A woman from the crowd yelled, Music, fire them, someone else shouted. Arrest them for assault. Lane shook his head violently, stepping backward. Sir, please. We're sorry. We're so sorry. Stephen leaned in slightly. Are you apologizing because you understand what you did wrong? Or because you got caught? Lane's face crumpled. He had no answer. Briggs tried. Sir, we were trying to be vigilant. And yet Stephen said, You failed at the simplest part of your job. His voice hardened. Observation. Lane flinched. Stephen continued, You saw a man talking to children at a public festival. You assumed danger. You created a threat where none existed. And when confronted with confusion, you responded with force. Briggs looked like he hadn't breathed in minutes. What happens now? The crowd leaned in, phones up, hands shaking, waiting for the verdict. Stephen sighed, long and controlled. Music, he glanced around at the terrified children now huddled behind their parents. He looked at the bystanders, still capturing everything on camera. He looked at the officers last. What happens now? Stephen said, Depends on your honesty. Lane blinked rapidly. Honesty. Tell the truth, Stephen said. Exactly what you did. Exactly why. Music, and accept the consequences. Lane's voice cracked. We were wrong. We panicked. We overreacted. Briggs nodded furiously. Yes, sir. We weren't thinking straight. We're sorry, Stephen paused. The crowd held its collective breath. Then, he said quietly, You will file a full report and I will review it myself. Lane nearly collapsed. Briggs let out a sound like a dying animal. Stephen turned to the crowd. Thank you for intervening. Thank you for speaking up. Cheers erupted. The two officers stood frozen like prisoners waiting for a verdict. Music. Stephen looked back at them. This isn't over, he said, but you have a chance to redeem yourselves if you take responsibility. He began walking away. The crowd parted like he was royalty. The officers stared after him, pale and trembling. And the festival buzzed with one question, whispered from every direction. Music, what would you have done if you were standing there? The walk back to the command tent felt like the longest walk of Lane and Briggs's lives. Every step was heavy, every breath shaky. Every pair of eyes in the festival seemed to follow them because the crowd knew. Everyone knew. They hadn't just tackled a random guy. They'd assaulted the director of the FBI, and now they were marching toward the tent, like soldiers returning from a lost battle. Inside, the temporary command post buzzed with activity radio chatter. Security screens blinking, supervisors checking patrol routes. Music, it was supposed to be a normal event shift. But the moment Lieutenant Harris saw the state of his officers' uniforms wrinkled, faces pale. Lane's hands still trembling, his eyebrows shot up. What the hell happened to you two? He demanded. Lane swallowed hard. Sir, we need to file an incident report. Briggs cleared his throat, voice croaking. Immediately, Harris frowned. What incident? You two were assigned to crowd flow, and he stopped mid-sentence when he noticed the smear on Lane's collar. The faint imprint of fingers from where Stephen had broken the chokehold. Harris stiffened. Did you get into an altercation? Lane nodded, staring at the ground. With who? Briggs whispered. Director Steven Seagal. The tent went dead silent. Someone dropped a clipboard. A radio operator stopped mid-sentence. Harris blinked once, then twice, and then red-faced. Furious, he hissed. You're joking. Tell me you're joking. Lane shook his head. Sir, it was him, Briggs added, barely audible. We didn't know. Harris grabbed both of them by the arms and dragged them to the back table. Sit now. They sat, like scolded schoolchildren. Harris leaned forward, speaking through clenched teeth. Tell me everything. Lane's voice cracked. We saw him. Talking to some kids. We thought maybe he was trying to lure them. Briggs nodded meekly. We thought we were preventing something. Harris's jaw tightened. So you approached him. Lane's face turned ashy. We didn't really approach. We kind of engaged. Briggs corrected him. We grabbed him. Harris stared at them in disbelief. You grabbed a civilian without cause? Lane whispered. He wasn't compliant. He wasn't non-compliant. Briggs corrected quickly. He was just calm. Lane put his face in his hands. Music, we mistook calm for resistance. Harris exhaled sharply and rubbed his temples. Music, and then Lane's voice grew quieter. We tried to restrain him. Harris slammed his palm on the table. You attacked the director of the FBI. Briggs flinched so hard his chair squeaked. We didn't know, Lane added. He didn't announce himself at first. Harris glared. He doesn't have to announce himself. He's not a suspect. The entire tent was silent, watching the meltdown unfold. Harris leaned forward. You understand this is beyond a simple mistake. This is a national-level incident. This will go to Washington. Lane nodded, tearful. Sir, he told us to file a full report. Harris froze. He told you personally. Briggs nodded. Yes, sir. And he said he'll review it himself. Harris closed his eyes like the world was ending. Start writing, he ordered now. Lane and Briggs picked up the incident forms with trembling hands. Every word felt heavier than the last. Observed suspicious behavior, engaged subject. Subject advised compliance. Misinterpreted actions, applied restraint. Subject identified himself as Lane couldn't bring himself to write the final line. Briggs whispered, We have to. He told us to. Lane shut his eyes and wrote it. Director, Federal Bureau of Investigation. When the reports were done, Harris read them. His face a mix of disgust, disbelief, and exhaustion. You two music realize, he said coldly. This could end your careers. Lane nodded, defeated. Briggs stared at the table, hollow-eyed. Harris took a long breath. But the director gave you a chance. He didn't have you arrested. He didn't file charges on the spot, Lane whispered. Why do you think he did that? Before Harris could answer, a voice came from the tent's entrance. Because he's giving you something rare. Everyone turned. Steven Seagal stood there, badge concealed, arms music folded, presence commanding, without a single ounce of aggression. Lane and Briggs froze. Harris shot to attention. Director, sir, we had no idea you were coming here. I'm not here as director, Steven said. I'm here as a citizen and as a witness. He stepped closer. Lane almost slid under the table. Briggs's breathing went uneven. Steven placed the reports on the table. I've read enough of these in my life to know when someone is lying, he said softly. You told the truth? Lane blinked in surprise. Briggs's shoulders slumped with relief. But don't mistake my leniency for approval. Steven's voice hardened, not loud, but sharp enough to cut any remaining denial out of them. You acted recklessly. You misread the situation, and you escalated something that never needed escalation. Lane nodded quickly. We understand, sir, Briggs whispered. We're sorry. Truly, Steven looked at them both. You'll undergo retraining. You'll be monitored, and your supervisors will evaluate your fitness for duty. Harris nodded in agreement. But I'm giving you this chance, Steven added. Because accountability means more when it comes from within. Lane stared at him, stunned. You're giving us a chance. Steven nodded once. You stumbled, he said. Now prove you can stand. He turned toward the exit. Lane and Briggs watched him go. Awe, fear, music, and respect swirling in their eyes. And outside the tent, the crowd erupted when they saw him again recording. His music cheering, sharing the moment because the world was about to see what really happened. And Judgment Day was coming. The moment Steven stepped out of the command tent, dozens of phones swung toward him. People surged forward, not in chaos, but with a kind of electric anticipation. The air vibrated. Everyone knew something massive had just happened. A young man in the crowd whispered to his friend, Dude, that's Steven Seagal. Like the Steven Seagal. Another added, Bro, he's not just a movie guy anymore. He's the FBI director. This is huge. Within minutes, the first clips hit social media. One showed the officers grabbing Steven. Another captured Lane shouting as he applied the chokehold. Another filmed Steven flipping Briggs with a single controlled movement. And another shaky but powerful caught the moment the badge was revealed. Every clip had one thing in common. People screaming in disbelief. Comments exploded instantly. They attacked who?
No way.
They assaulted the FBI director. Steven Seagal handled that with pure calm. These officers are done. This is why training matters. Within 10 minutes, the videos had thousands of views. Within 30, they had hundreds of thousands. By the 1-hour mark, music the name Steven Seagal was trending on every platform. Inside the festival, Steven felt the shift happening. His phone buzzed nonstop. Calls, messages, alerts, all from Washington. But he ignored them for the moment. Instead, he turned to the crowd and spoke not loudly, not theatrically, just honestly. No one should be judged by appearance, he said. Music and no one should use authority without responsibility. People nodded, clapped, even shouted in agreement. Someone yelled, You handled it like a real leader. Steven simply smiled once and walked away. But the world wasn't done with the story. Not even close. By evening, major news networks had picked it up. Anchors spoke with urgency, showing still frames from the viral footage. Experts debated police escalation. Commentators argued about training, profiling, and the need for reform. Panels discussed what the officers should have done. Former agents talked about Steven's restraint. Politicians called for investigations. And through it all, the footage kept circulating. Back at the local precinct, Lane and Briggs sat in a small office with the blinds drawn. Their phones had been confiscated to control the situation. Both men looked like they hadn't slept in days, even though only a few hours had passed. Lane stared at the wall, his voice hollow. We're on every channel. Briggs's hands shook as he buried his face. I didn't think it would blow up like this. Millions of views. Millions. The door opened. Lieutenant Harris stepped in, tension in his shoulders. Both officers shot up instantly. "Sit," Harris said, voice tired. They sat. "There's been contact from Washington," he said. "The deputy director wants a full briefing." Lane's heart dropped into his stomach. Washington saw it? Harris nodded. Everyone saw it. The room fell silent. Briggs whispered, "Are we fired?" Harris hesitated. "Not yet." Director Segal's response is the reason why. Lane blinked. "He's not pushing for dismissal." "No," Harris said. "In fact, he told the higher-ups that he believes in reform, not destruction. He emphasized that you admitted your mistakes." Briggs nearly broke down right there. He defended us. "Don't misunderstand," Harris corrected. "He's not excusing what you did. He's holding you accountable, but he's also given you a chance to learn instead of wiping your careers clean off the map." Lane wiped his eyes. Why? After everything, Harris took a deep breath. Because leadership isn't about vengeance, and he's a leader. Meanwhile, across town, Stephen finally answered one of the calls from Washington. He stood in a quiet room, the festival noise far behind him. Director Segal, a senior official, began. "We've seen the footage. The Bureau is ready to issue a statement condemning the officers." "Not yet," Stephen replied calmly. There was a pause, sir. "With respect, the public outrage is immense." "Music, I know," Stephen said, "which is why this moment matters. We don't solve anger with more anger." The official sounded puzzled. "Then what do you suggest?" Stephen looked out the window at the fading sunlight. "Transparency," he said. "Retraining, accountability, and a message that authority exists to protect, not to intimidate." Another pause, this time thoughtful. "So, you're taking a restorative approach. I'm taking a human approach." The call ended on that note. By the time Stephen returned home that night, millions of people had seen the clips. Hashtags were everywhere. Music think pieces were being drafted. His inbox was overflowing. But Stephen wasn't thinking about the fame or the noise. He was thinking about the moment Lane apologized about the fear in Briggs's eyes when he realized the truth. Felt the responsibility of power, both theirs and his own. This incident, massive as it was, wasn't about humiliation. It was about change. And the world music was already watching for what came next. By the next morning, the entire country felt different. Every major news outlet led with the same headline. FBI Director Steven Seagal, assaulted by local officers, responds with unmatched calm. Clips of the incident had crossed 40 million views overnight. Commentators praised Stephen's restraint. Parents thanked him for protecting the children, and civil rights groups called the moment a turning point. But the biggest shock came when the FBI released its official statement, written and approved personally by Stephen. It didn't attack the officers. It didn't demand their firing. It didn't feed public outrage. Instead, it read, "Accountability is not punishment. It is an opportunity to rebuild trust and strengthen integrity. We must learn, not destroy." That single sentence went viral almost as fast as the original videos. Talk shows replayed it. Teachers printed it. Officers around the nation discussed it in morning briefings. Stephen hadn't just addressed the incident, he had reframed the entire conversation. Later that afternoon, the two officers, Lane and Briggs, were summoned to the precinct's main conference room. Wordlessly, nervously, they entered. Inside stood Stephen. No cameras, no reporters, no audience, just the three of them. Lane swallowed hard, unable to speak. Briggs stood stiff as a statue, eyes fixed on the floor. Stephen studied them for a moment. "You've both had a long night," he said quietly. Lane nodded shakily. "Sir, we know we messed up." Briggs's voice cracked. "Music, we don't expect forgiveness." Stephen took a slow breath. "You don't need my forgiveness? You need to forgive yourselves enough to change." They both looked up, stunned. "You panicked," Stephen said. You misjudged. You escalated. But you also admitted everything. You didn't lie. You didn't cover your tracks. That matters. Music Lane blinked back tears. I swear, sir, I will never react like that again. Music Briggs nodded. Neither will I. Stephen held their gaze. Good, because starting tomorrow, you're both entering a mandatory 8-week training program, de-escalation, conservation, communication, and controlled response. And you'll be supervised for the next year. They nodded quickly, accepting it without hesitation. You owe your community a better version of yourselves, Stephen said. So earn it. Lane wiped his face. Thank you for not ending our careers. Stephen's voice softened. I don't want to destroy officers. I want to build better ones. For a moment, the room was silent. Then Lane whispered, Sir, why did you treat us with respect after what we did? Stephen answered with a calmness that seemed to settle the air around them. Because respect isn't a reward, Music. It's a standard. Neither man forgot that sentence for the rest of their lives. When Stephen left the station that day, a small crowd waited outside. Citizens, families, Music, and even officers from other units. They applauded, not out of fan worship, but out of genuine admiration. One man called out, Director, thank you for showing the country how justice should look. A woman added, My son saw your video. He said he wants to be like you, calm and brave. Stephen gave them a gentle wave and moved toward the waiting car. But before getting in, he turned and addressed the crowd. Judgment without understanding leads to fear, he said. But understanding leads to respect, and respect leads to peace. Phones captured it instantly, and within hours, that clip became the most shared video of the day. By evening, talk shows praised his leadership. Youth groups held discussions. Police departments across the nation held emergency meetings to review training protocols. The incident had started as a mistake, an ugly one. But Stephen's response transformed it into a national lesson. Not about strength, not about fame, but about humility, courage, and restraint. In the final wave of online reactions, one comment stood out among millions. Real power is staying calm when you have every right to be furious. Stephen never commented on the viral fame. He didn't care about the spotlight. All he cared about was the hope that maybe, just maybe, the next officer in the same situation would see a citizen, not a threat. And that one shift in perspective could save a life.